This is just a quick little mini encaustic piece I wanted to show you guys. I'm starting out by adding 3 layers of white to my wood board, and this is just a small 4x4, so it goes by pretty quick. And I'm trying to add pretty thick layers of wax. And so, especially when I do a smaller one like this, instead of brushing it on, I kind of roll it across the surface, and I get better wax application that way. And the blowtorch really fuses very well. It fuses quickly and it also gives you a really smooth surface without any lumps or texture or anything. Now this is my bubble technique that I've done in a few other videos, but this one I'm doing 3 layers of bubbles, and so I'm kind of building up the texture a lot more than I have in some of my other projects. What I do essentially is I'm just dripping wax onto my painting. And this I'm aiming for the center and kind of building it up in the center and kind of spreading it out a little bit. So this is the first layer of my bubbles. Once I've added the drips and fused them to the surface, I fuse very gently and quickly because I don't want the color to blend into the white at all. I want them to stay circles. So I fuse it, but I fuse it very quickly. Once it has cooled enough that it's not hot anymore, but it's still fairly warm, I take my awl and I carve around the bubbles. So I have, and I usually go all the way down to the wood. And sometimes you get kind of a high buildup where you're carving, especially if you have a thick base layer that you're working with. And so I'll use my finger to kind of flatten out those lines a little bit. So I go through and I carve around each bubble and then I fuse it. And this helps to define the bubbles a little bit. They kind of puff up a little bit more when you fuse it like that, which gives it more of a bubble look. But you do have to realize that some of your lines you're going to have to go through and redo a little bit. But because I'm doing multiple layers, I kind of skip that step this time. So instead of redoing the lines, I'm just adding more drips to give it more texture and kind of build up, especially in the center where I want it to be thickest. It can take a while to carve around all these bubbles, but it's definitely worth it. And once again, you're done with your lines. You fuse it a little bit. You make the bubbles puff up. You get rid of a lot of the extra wax that's kind of built up around the lines that you've made. And this is my third and final layer of drips. So I carve around all the bubbles in each layer because I never know where the drips are going to fall. And each layer kind of builds on itself a little bit. And so you get unique shapes and unique lines and just kind of allow the drips to guide you where to carve. And I've cut down on this quite a bit just because it can be kind of tedious to watch me carve all of these bubbles. And I know my hand is blocking a lot of the action, so I apologize for that. But you should have a fairly good idea at this point of the technique and what kind of goes into it. And it's just, following your instincts wherever you feel the lines need to go. Big bubbles, small bubbles, bubbles within bubbles. It's all up to you. Doing a fuse, and then I take a little bit of time and I fix some of the lines that fusing gets rid of. So once I redefine the lines that have been fused together, there's never very many, but there's always a few. Now it's time to add oil paint. And I do this when the surface is cold. I don't want to depress the wax or make any kind of marks with my fingers. So I do it after the surface has cooled completely. And I find with this technique you really have to use quite a bit of oil paint because the lines can be really deep, especially since I'm building it up in the center. There's a lot of texture there, a lot of deep lines, and I really want the paint embedded deeply everywhere. So it can take a lot of paint. But I love using different colors of oil paint and then watching them kind of blend together. You have to be careful, especially with the light colors, like yellow can be overwhelmed very easily by the rich red. So I have to make sure I'm using different fingers, that I don't mix them too much. And I had to wipe off my gloves a few times to make sure I didn't blend the yellow with the red too much. And this is linseed oil I'm using to wipe the surface. It's great because it removes the excess oil paint, but it will eventually oxidize and leave the surface, so I won't have an oily painting forever. It does take a couple days for that process to happen, but I'm left with just a beautiful encaustic painting without any oil on it. And that's it. That's this technique. Another example of it. Thank you guys so much for watching it. I really appreciate your support. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the bell so you get notifications when I have new videos. I post a new one every week as much as I possibly can. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks.